Hi everyone. Today we're going to discuss how to compare fractions, but before we go into it, I think it's important to go over a couple of things. First, what does compare mean in math? In order for me to compare things, I actually need to know what the word means. Two, I want to go over what strategy we're going to use in order to compare fractions. As you know, we're very lucky that in math we have different ways, different strategies, and different ways of thinking that allow us to solve the exact same problem. So, what does compare mean in math? Compare means to determine whether a number is larger, greater than, less than, or equal to another number. How does that help me in real life? For example, if Miss Martinez, if I'm cooking a meal at home that requires a certain amount of ingredients or a certain amount of each ingredient, I need to make sure I have enough before I make my meal. For example, if I need 3/4 of paprika, I need to make sure that I have enough at home to make it. If the amount I need or the recipe requires is less than the amount I have, I need to go to a store to buy it. So now that we've discussed what compare means, let's talk about what strategy we're going to use today to compare fractions. Today, we're going to find the common denominator of two fractions to compare them. As you remember, the denominator is the bottom number in the fraction, and it represents the total pieces that make up the whole. Common in this case means the same. So we're trying to create fractions with the same denominator so we can compare them and figure out which one is greater than, less than, or equal to the other. Now that we've reviewed what compare means and we've gone over what strategy we're using, let's figure out the steps we need to take in order to compare these fractions. Today I'm going to compare 2/3 and 3/4. And remember, the strategy we're using is to find the common denominator of these fractions to then compare them. As you can tell, 2/3 has a denominator of 3 and 3/4 has a denominator of 4. Therefore, they do not have the same denominator. So I need to find it. What's the first thing I need to do? The first thing I need to do is find the least common multiple of 3 and 4 to find the least common multiple of my denominator. But in order to find the least common multiple of my denominator, which in this case my denominator are 3 and 4, I actually need to know what a multiple is. So let's review that. A multiple is a number. A multiple of a number is a product of that number and any whole number except for 0 and 1. I'm going to repeat that. A multiple of a number is a product of that number and any whole number that does not include 0 and a negative number. So now that I remember what a multiple is, I'm going to find the multiples of 3 and 4 with the goal of finding the least common or smallest number that they both share. So, what are the multiples of 3? I multiply 3 times 1, which equals 3. My product is 3, so the smallest multiple of 3 is 3. And I keep going. 3 times 2 is 6. That is the product, so the second multiple of 3 is 6. And I have 3, 6, 9, 12, 15, and I could keep going, but I want to take a pause to see if I can find the multiples of 4. And I ask myself, what are the multiples of 4? 4 times 1 is 4, so the first multiple of 4 is 4. And I keep going. 4, 8, 12. And I pause. Why do I pause? I pause because I realize I have found my least common multiple of 4 and 3. It is 12. So now that I found my least common multiple, what do I do that? How is it related to fractions? In this case, my least common multiple becomes my new denominator. In this specific example, the least common multiple is the new denominator, and the new denominator is 12. Now that I have my new denominator, I need to figure out what I'm going to do. I can't just plug it in. I cannot switch the 3 and the 4 into 12. Why? Because I am making these fractions into equivalent fractions. I still have to compare 2/3 and 3/4. So I am looking for the equivalent fractions of 2/3 and 3/4 that have the same denominator. With that said, I need to make sure you remember what equivalent fractions means. An equivalent fraction has the same value. They represent the same part of the whole. They are equal. That means that 2/3 has a fraction with a denominator of 12 that is worth the exact same amount. And that there's a fraction with 3/4 there's a fraction with a denominator of 12 that is worth the same as 3/4. And I love using the example of my class. Why? Because I love them and I think it's a good example. My class is 24 students. If I have half of my class in an activity, I have 12 out of 24 students doing an activity. That is equivalent or equal to 1/2. Those two fractions are the same. They're equivalent. They're just represented with the same numbers. With different numbers, I'm sorry. So with that said, let's find the equivalent fractions of 2/3 and 3/4 so that have the same denominator, in this case 12, so then we can compare them. So now I have found the least common multiple. I know it becomes my new denominator. And we said the third step is to create equivalent fractions for 2/3 and 3/4 with the same denominator, in this case 12. So let's do that. So, how do I create equivalent fractions with a new denominator? So this is very important. In order for us to create equivalent fractions, I need to multiply or divide the numerator and the denominator by the exact same thing. And why? It's not just because an adult told you or a teacher told you or because it's math. There's a reason behind it. And the reason is that a fraction we need to cut into equal pieces. In order for a cake to have equal pieces, they have to be the exact same size. The numerator, which is the amount of pieces I have, and the denominator, which is the total pieces I've cut the cake into, have to be the same. They come from the same cake. So with that said, in this case, we are multiplying. Why? Because I'm going from the smaller number to the bigger number. So I ask myself, what number do I multiply 3 by to get 12? And the answer is 4. And as I mentioned, we have to multiply the numerator by the exact same thing we multiplied the denominator by. Therefore, I multiply 2 times 4, which gets me a product of 8. And I do the same thing for 3/4. In this case, I ask myself, what do I multiply by 4 to get 12? And my answer is 3. Therefore, I multiply 4 times 3, which gets me 12. And as I mentioned, we do the exact same thing that we did to the denominator to the numerator. Therefore, I multiply 3 times 3, which gets me a product of 9. So 2/3 is equivalent or equal to 8 12s, and 3/4 is equivalent to 9 12s. So now I've met my goal of creating fractions with a common denominator, which then allows me to compare them. But in order to compare them, I need to make sure I understand which one is bigger, greater than, or less than the other one based on the relationship. Think about it if you buy delicious Girl Scout cookies from your friends who are Girl Scouts. If each box has 12 cookies, which is your total or your denominator, and you eat 8 out of the 12, and your friend eats 9 of the 12, your friend ate more. Therefore, when my denominators are the same, the bigger numerator is the bigger fraction. Therefore, 2/3 is less than 3/4, or 3/4 is greater than 2/3. So with that said, thank you so much for watching. I hope this was helpful and I look forward to seeing you soon. Bye.